So here is a series of tweets on fake news. On fake news. Don't be gaslit and don't be fooled. Remember, politics is a post-truth game. Politics is a post-truth game. Now, this is an inconvenient truth for propagandists. If their audience becomes aware of other narratives, the spell is likely to become broken. We are their customers. So, be ready to shop around. And then I go into some shopping tips. Shopping tips. Number 1. Keep an open mind. Be willing to listen to all sides of an issue from all observers, no matter their reputation, ideology, etc. Number 2. Read entire news articles beyond the headline and the lead. Number 3. Be wary of heavy editorializing and journalists' mind reading. Hashtag fake news. So it continues here. Shopping tips number 4. Question everything you hear, see, and read. There's always another question. Absolutism will not be your friend in a post-truth world. And that is true, by the way. I've talked about how clown world actually lies between postmodernism, which is largely post-truth framings of reality, and absolutism. Okay, when everything is a construct, and yet you're willing to assign definitive labels to things, set definitive associations, well, it can create a dicey situation, and you better find your clown makeup, because that's where you're headed. Number 5. Multiple outlets reporting the same story based on anonymous sources shouldn't be considered corroboration. Hashtag, once again, fake news. Another shopping tip here, number 6. Communicate. When reading between the lines and determining bias or integrity in journalistic outlets, perhaps extending to all social media, we must keep in mind our own confirmation bias, open discourse, information sharing, and incorporating tips 1 and 4. 1, once again, is keeping an open mind, listening to all sides. And number 4 is questioning everything you see, hear, and read. Okay, so let's start from the top. Don't be gaslit and don't be fooled. Remember, politics is a post-truth game. So, yes, politicians will say whatever they need to say to get elected. That includes making big promises and, of course, not really, addressing any of the negatives to do with their campaign. If they make a gaffe, if it's strategic to apologize, they may apologize. Now, I say don't apologize too often because that can create a bit of a sense of weakness about your campaign or about your person. If you're always apologizing and trying to seek the salvation, you're fighting against the prophets of different modern religions telling you, well, you're not following the code of political correctness, or you're not doing this right, or you said the wrong word. They're just trying to control you. And if you're a leader in politics, you want to be a leader. Leaders don't get led around by followers of any given ideology. They go their own way. They do that scientific test. They A/B. They try to find the answers to difficult questions by checking around, not just defaulting to the Bible of their choice. May it be the modern religion of censorship, getting rid of all the bad, again, subjective information out there, all the bad speech, all the bad voices, all the bad people, all the bad topics, all the bad, reasonable arguments that you just don't happen to agree with. But in politics, they don't have to stick to the rules. It's, they say that, politicians lie. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious. I mean, that's one of those things that you actually have to grow up a little bit and realize, like, when you first get out there. Now, I'm not saying that politicians might not believe what they're saying. They might be using hyperbole. We've certainly seen Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and all these different people use a ton of hyperbole, AOC. But they might believe what they're saying. They might just not understand certain things, and they might be going on certain preconceptions. But in general, you can say almost anything, and as long as you say it the right way, if you use the right words, if you use what they call weasel words, if you say like may, could, should, would, blah, blah, blah. There's all these different ways you can add a layer of uncertainty to your speech. And when you're dealing with something like linguistically like politics, where you're making these giant promises and you're saying things that are so often taken out of context that it becomes a game to find, like I said, no publicity is bad publicity. You can say something outrageous or something that's just a little wrong, and it might get more reported, so that the bulk of your message is there. And this one little wrong thing is why everybody's looking at it, but they're getting the bulk of your message. But the fake news, this goes for, I don't like to put like a blanket term over every single, news outlet in the mainstream or in the independent or anywhere, the mollusk middle media of your, Young Turks and InfoWars and so forth. I don't want to put a blanket on it, but fake news just means that you're, embellishing on the news. And people all throughout journalism have gotten these kinds of criticisms. Quillette recently published a hoax. They published a hoax article that was supposed to be from the perspective of a DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, perspective, and it turns out to be a hoax. And they also apparently embellished a little bit on that, and that would be fake news. If the person is editorializing a lot and then using, things that aren't necessarily true, but then adding words, adding adjectives, framing reality in a sort of duplicitous and not really, might be lying by omission. There's all these different techniques they can use to make it fake news, to make it something that's not exactly what was said, and reporting using a very thick editorial lens. So politics is post-truth. That's why they say whatever they want. Now, this is an inconvenient truth for propagandists. If their audience becomes aware of other narratives, the spell is likely to become broken. So what this means, of course, is that propagandists need to keep you, ideally, in an echo chamber. They don't want you to hear conflicting information. They want your cognitive dissonance to bounce off anything that contradicts the narrative that they have tried to place through their messaging, repeated again and again into your brain. They're trying to make sure that conditioning, that story, that narrative about the bigger picture stays intact. So if somebody else comes out and says on Twitter or Reddit or 4chan, wherever it might be, Gab, for instance, if they come out with something that is contrary to the narrative that the propagandist is putting forward, if there's a larger media collusion, if there's just this larger narrative, like Russiagate, for instance, they put out, anything that contradicts that makes you guilty by association with the bad guys. Hey, you're questioning Russiagate, and you're on the left? You're on the left, and you're questioning Russiagate? You must be a Russian spy. And that's what they say about Tulsi Gabbard, and they say it about anybody that goes against the narrative. You're with Russia. You're Putin, Kremlin, Russia, Moscow. Orange man red. Orange man communist Russia, Soviet Union. They'll go down that road. Anybody that questions it. So we are their customers. We are the customers of the information that the media is peddling. So I say it's good to shop around. So, the shopping tips. Number one, keep an open mind. Of course, it's always good to consider that everything that has a positive also has a negative. Everything that has one side here has another opposite side. There's always two different ways to look at the same situation. That's, we all have 7 billion people on Earth, right? So that's 7 billion different perspectives on reality. So there's always at least two ways to look at every situation, and you need to be willing to listen to all sides of an issue from all observers, no matter their reputation, ideology, and other qualifying factors. So if you listen to a show like, say, for example, Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience, he has people that are all over the place ideologically. He'll have people from the right, people from the left. He'll have people in between. He'll have libertarians. He's had socialists. He's had all kinds of people, classical liberals, traditional liberals, whatever label you want to throw on it, conservatives. He's had right-wingers, left-wingers. He listens to all sides, and he comes to his conclusion, which happens to be probably in the sphere of left libertarian, but he doesn't care about their reputation, their ideology. He just wants to listen. He wants to listen. Joe Rogan listens. And that's what I like to do too. I'd like to hear everybody out. Again, I might not agree, and I might get trolled, and I might get people that are just not happy to hear that I'm spouting the opposite ideology or another conflicting alternative perspective, but I do want to hear them. Again, if it's something that I've heard a million times before, I might be a little less receptive, but again, there might be a new angle on an old idea, so that's always worth taking note of. Listening to all sides of an issue from all observers, not pointing to somebody and say, well, they have a bad association. They talked to the wrong person once. As my friend Tyler says, they have guilt by conversation. They spoke to the wrong person once. They talked to a neo-Nazi. They talked to an Antifa member that had hit somebody over the head with a billy club the other day. And I say, well, that's not the greatest situation, committing violent acts, but I'm still going to talk to that person. I'm still going to allow myself to associate with them. We have freedom of association in this country. Like, we have this right to talk to who we want to listen. Because Scott Adams actually had a great little segment on this where he talks about how, do you think that these negative people, these bad association people, may it be warranted or not, do you think that they are going to make me worse if I talk to them? If you talk to them, will they make your ideology, your view of the world worse? Or will you make them better? I think I will make anybody that I step into the room with better. That's my position on it. I don't like to, cast... I do, of course, don't want to speak to somebody like Jeffrey Epstein. But again, I would still talk to him. I'd want to hear what he has to say. I'm not restricted by his evil. It doesn't mean that I become evil by association for talking to an evil person. It means that I'm gathering information about my reality, and it may be uncomfortable, it may be dark information, it may be not the most savory person to spend time with, and I probably wouldn't spend much time with them, but talking to them is totally on the table. I don't like guilt by association. I am not really a collectivist in that way. So I say here, shopping tip number 2, of course, is read entire news articles beyond the headline and lead. So we have a culture where there is so much information coming in at all times from across the internet. You have your news aggregators, you have your social media, you have your dedicated news sites, you have your Google ads, you have your searches you can do on Google, DuckDuckGo, Bing. If you're desperate, if the other 2 domains are down, you can go to Bing. But of course, people do just see sometimes a headline, which could be very misleading. A headline or a lead, the first couple of paragraphs, the first couple sentences can be a lot different from the content of the rest of the article. So it can be you can skew your perception of reality to just pay attention to the headline and the lead. the meat of the article. If you're interested enough, again, this is all voluntary. You have the liberty to completely ignore what I'm saying, of course, and read the articles you'd like to read. But I'm saying that if we go by headlines, this is as a guideline, if we go by headlines only and leads only, we're not getting the whole picture. We're going by what they want us to generally ride with. Now, if you look at the New York Times, they came under some fire recently from the anti-Trump community when they changed their headline about Trump and the shooting, the Dayton and El Paso shootings, and of course the Gilroy, the Garlic Festival. There was a headline, I don't recall it at this time, but of course, if you remember, leave a comment below with that. But they had a sort of pseudo-positive, by New York Times standards, headline for Trump. And because of the angry mob, the modern religion of outrage culture, of course, coming into effect, trying to get some dopamine, moral virtue, and universal truth by enacting moral authoritarianism, going out and saying, look, I think that you got this wrong. Orange Man bad. You have to make him badder. There was a slight chance that Orange Man decent in your headline. So let's change that to Orange Man bad because that fits my confirmation bias and my perspective. And I am your customer. I am the one. These readers are the customer. They are the one getting the information, getting the headline, buying the product, paying for the New York Times. So give us our Orange Man bad, damn it. That's kind of what they do. So I say, read the entire article, get all the information, don't settle for just the headline. But when you're reading, be wary of heavy editorializing and journalists' mind reading. So when I talk about fake news, a lot of it is this editorializing and mind reading, adding sensationalism, adding extra words, adjectives, even adverbs, and just adding this frame of what happened, adding a story, adding a narrative that wasn't there in the first place. That's fake news. That's one definition for fake news. When you just, don't report the whole story, just report the positives or just report the negatives. Can't do that. You have to have the full bag, warts and all. And otherwise, you're lying by omission and you're creating fake news. So, and of course, a lot of journalists mind read, of course, the Fine People hoax, the Charlottesville hoax, with people saying that Donald Trump called neo-Nazis, white supremacists, KKK, whatever it might be, fine people. And of course, the only way to come to that conclusion definitively, is to mind read that he meant to say what he said. But of course, if you take the full context, and I do have a video out, President Trump's comments during the Charlottesville tragedy, De-Hoaxed. That's also on my channel here on YouTube. I don't think it's on BitChute yet, so definitely check it out on YouTube. But if you look at the full context, you understand that he does condemn white supremacists and neo-Nazis totally. So anything else from there, it's all just... I've seen people have cognitive dissonance and mind read and say, well, there were people he said the night before, and there were people there the night before that were bad people, and they were marching with the tiki torches, and you say, well, look, we don't know the full demographics. People at the New York Times, Scott Adams, a bunch of other people have talked to people that were at Charlottesville in this period, and they were not racist. They weren't any part of these groups. They might have been liberal or conservative, but they weren't bad people. They were fine people. And the president, you'd have to mind read that he knew every single person that was there. You'd have to mind read a lot to come to this conclusion that the president is, racist, or that he called neo-Nazis and supremacists fine people. So that kind of mind reading, though, becomes second nature when you're following the mainstream media and all of their attempts to mind read the president. Oh, he's angry, he's this, he's that. And they do it to everybody. They do it to everybody else too. People they like and people they dislike. They try to paint a picture in the mind of the reader, of the customer, showing that, giving an angle. Well, Trump's mad, Trump's angry, Trump's bothered by this. Trump gets mad when white supremacists are condemned. That's what they'll say, things like that. How many times does somebody have to say, I condemn, I condemn, I condemn? That they act like you can just turn around one minute and say, I hate this thing, I dislike this thing, I condemn it, and then one slip of the tongue later and you're supporting it again? It's asinine. It's not real. It shows that it's a game, that it's a post-truth game. Like, if you look at it that way, you look at it that way. If you believe that the president is an otherist, just as people believed with Obama derangement syndrome, that he was some kind of Kenyan-born socialistic, Stalin, Lenin figure. Actually, the biggest kind of derangement syndrome I can remember, other than Trump derangement syndrome, which is huge, is, of course, Clinton derangement syndrome. I mean, people in my family, they were saying that Bill Clinton was in the Revelations in the Bible, in the New Testament. It was the mark of the beast. He was in there, he was and I haven't actually read Revelations, but he was in there, like it was all being foretold, and there was this whole, moral panic and this hysteria about the upcoming millennium. The year 2000. Of course, I am a millennial. I was 16 in 2000. But, Bill Clinton, people that were on the evangelical, the religious right, they were, of course, many of them saw Bill Clinton as some kind of evil figure. Satanic, even. I mean, it was insane. And, of course, we say that now about, Obama derangement syndrome, saying that he's anything but a wonderful two-term president that, yes, droned a lot of people and did all the things that presidents do as it pertains to the military-industrial complex and crony capitalism and all the things, all the problems that Trump continued and inherited. Obama did some great things. He brought us back into decent relationship with Cuba. Not great yet, unfortunately. And then, of course, Trump derangement syndrome, Orange Man bad, Orange Man Hitler, concentration camps, white supremacists on every corner. The president is a malevolent otherist, blah, 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 blah. So a lot of this has to do with mind-reading intentions, just as gaslighting is. Like gaslighting. And they say, you're gaslighting. That's them mind-reading, that your intentions are to deceive and to create a false reality. And they might be right if you're a bad person. Check out my video, A Pro Tip on Lying, for more about that. But it's all about mind reading. It's all about trying to find and paint this picture that may or may not be concrete. It might be rather abstract, maybe a little Picasso-like. So number 4 shopping tip is question everything you see, hear, and read. There's always another question, and there always is. Absolutism will not be your friend in a post-truth world. So if you really settle in to that echo chamber and you say, well, everything outside that narrow Overton window of acceptable dialogue, acceptable opinions, credible sources, credible opinions, if everything outside is extreme, is wrongthink, and if I don't stick with the group, I might get ostracized. Well, you get people that begin to, their critical thinking starts to break down because they're not questioning what they see, what they hear, what they read. They just go with the modern religion of institutions. They say, well, it came from a state source. We have to trust the state, trust the government, right? Oh, it came from media? It came from the news media. Their job is to tell the truth, where facts matter, fact-based truth tellers. Like if we can't trust the media, who can we trust? If I can't trust, Fox, CBS, ABC, CNN, if I can't trust them, who can I trust? They get into that mentality. And they'll stay in the echo chamber of their side. They'll say, well, I only listen to Fox. I only listen to Hannity. Or they'll say, I'll listen to Maddow. Her voice is comforting to me. She's never led me wrong before, except on Russia. But of course, this is the way we are. We get used to it. We are creatures of habit, of course. But settling into one perspective when people are constantly lying and framing things differently, and they're using postmodern, post-truth framing, and then you settle into that one opinion, well, it's easier to manipulate you. If you're only listening to what the macro simulation states, the code that's allowed, you are by definition more controlled. And that can lead to a number of outcomes, some that might be beneficial to you and some that might not be, depending on the goals you have for society. So, like I said, there is media collusion, not only with political parties like the Republicans and the Democrats, proven by WikiLeaks, DNC leaks, and of course the Podesta emails, from which we learned that they were sending news outlets like MSNBC were sending their articles to John Podesta and the Clinton team, the DNC team, and of course Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They're sending these articles for editing, for review, because they don't want to actually give this completely unbiased perspective. They'd like it to be editorialized by the Democratic Party right away, just like that. So you'd see that, but you also see this. Number 5, shopping tip: multiple outlets reporting the same story based on anonymous sources shouldn't be considered corroboration. Because just like the Sinclair PSA, the Sinclair Broadcasting PSA, and I did do a video on that, so check that out on my channel. As we saw in that PSA, all of these networks are getting the same message to give you, to give me. So if they're going by anonymous sources and they're all going by the same exact story, and they say, well, anonymous source from within this government organization says blah, 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 and then they're all saying the same thing, it's all the same story. It's most likely all the same source. And if it's anonymous sources, you really don't know if there's any veracity to that, or if it's just hearsay, or if it's just a narrative, if it's just contrived. So I do say that, don't believe just because multiple outlets report the same exact story that we should believe it. Now, Scott Adams does have a little bit of a rule. He says if you see the same story reported on both sides, both the left and the right, the Democrat and the Republican side of the media echo chambers, the media macro simulation, you hear that same story, the likelihood is it's a bit more credible than if it were reported on just the left or just the right. So use your own judgment, of course. But I say, multiple outlets don't mean corroboration, because they can corroborate each other. And I talk about crafting that narrative in my video about the PSA, the Sinclair Broadcasting. So finally, the final shopping tip is communicate. When reading between the lines and determining bias and integrity in journalistic outlets, and that probably goes for all social media, we must keep in mind our own confirmation bias. The open discourse, the information sharing, and incorporating tips 1 and 4 can certainly help us when we're in this situation. So, again, this goes back to not just falling on that modern religion of institutions, not falling on the state, media, or academia to give us the right answer. We should look all around, and especially on opposite sides of a debate, before coming to a conclusion. We shouldn't go into this absolute world where one side is always right and the other side's always wrong, and it's just, that's not the way reality actually works. Sometimes the left is right, sometimes the right is right. Sometimes the authoritarians have a better idea, sometimes the libertarians down there in the comment section below have a better idea about how to do things. It all is situational. That's why I say it's a political sphere. I don't like to get caught up in the rigid nature of the political compass, because I don't think it's really about a dichotomy of left and right so much as authoritarian and libertarian. How much freedom are we willing to give up for security, as Benjamin Franklin would note? So communicating means talking. Keep on talking. Don't censor people you disagree with. Don't call for the deplatforming, depersoning, debanking, demonetizing, disincentivizing, and so forth. Keep those avenues open. Make sure that citizen journalism is remaining strong into the 2020s. Subject matter experts should be sought. They might have more insight on certain issues, but I don't like to get into this idea that, not everybody can actually speak, that only certain people, that only the experts can speak. I call that the first phase of censorship, self-censorship. Only the qualified are allowed to speak. Now, if they have better sources, if they have more, verifiable information, that is virtuous. But again, people are being told that, you have to be an expert. You have to be credentialed to say things, to talk, be part of the online dialogue. And I find that that's not really intellectual. I wouldn't call it pseudo-intellectual. I just say that it kind of undermines the intellectual discourse and the search for knowledge, wisdom, information. So, yes, making sure we question everything, keep an open mind, and talk, communicate. Don't be afraid to speak to anybody, because they're just people. Institutions are just people. Celebrities are just people. And of course, they can be wrong. I can be wrong. We can all be wrong. So it's important to make sure that we keep a pro-information frame on reality. And I say we need an Internet Bill of Rights so people's privacy and their voices are protected.